Friends, welcome. Can you hear me okay? Good, good. A very warm welcome to the Beckly Lecture 2026. Apologies for those who've been waiting some time, particularly those who've joined us online. We are now getting going properly. I need to let you know that this event is being recorded and photographed. So if you're uncomfortable with appearing in any photographs, then please could you let Alex know. Alex will raise his hand and we'll make sure you're not included in anything that's published. That's the only bit of housekeeping that I have to do this evening. Let me get on to the fun stuff and say it's lovely to see you here. My name is Simeon Mitchell. I act as the team leader of the Joint Public Issues team, which is how the Methodist, Baptist and United Reformed churches work together on issues of public policy and political engagement. And it's the privilege of the Joint Public Issues team to host the Beckly Lecture every year. The lecture was founded 100 years ago in 1926 by John Henry Beckly, a lay Wesleyan Methodist, with the purpose of furthering the development of Christian thinking on social, industrial, economic, or international subjects. If you go onto the Methodist Church website, you'll find a slightly patchy list of all the lectures that have been given over the last 100 years. They did continue all the way through the Second World War, but some of the titles of some of the lectures seem to have been lost in history. No doubt there are archives somewhere where they are available to be found. But those that are there, and you can see, offer an interesting reflection on the variety of topics which have been of concern to the church over the last 100 years, from totalitarianism to disarmament to gambling to family life. All sorts of topics have been covered by all sorts of eminent people. The very first lecture was given by Sir Josiah Stamp. I hadn't heard of him, but he was chair of the LMS Railway, and he spoke on the ethics of Christian ethics in economics. The year after, I was pleased to see that a female speaker was approached. There's not been so many of those over the years, but Eleanor Rathbone, who was a very famous independent MP, one of the first women MPs, spoke on family policy. Other notable figures to have given previous Beckly lectures include the Dr. William Temple, then the Archbishop of Canterbury, the historian, Professor Herbert Butterfield, Baroness Stocks, a suffragist and educationalist, Bishop John Robinson, and the independent MP and sleazebuster, Martin Bell. All sorts of people, and many eminent figures. In fact, a few people in the room tonight have previously been Beckly lecturers, so very eminent company. From politicians, from the church, from industry, from academia. It's notable as you look over that list that very few of the Beckly lecturers have been from outside of the UK, and even fewer have come from the global majority world. So it's a real delight in this for this 100th anniversary lecture to be able to welcome Roland Fernandes to give our lecture. Roland works with the United Methodist Church, of course, the biggest of the Methodist bodies across the world, and a major partner, sister organisation, sister denomination to the British Methodist Conference. Roland currently serves as General Secretary of the General Board of Global Ministries and of Higher Education and Ministry. I don't know how he manages all of those jobs at once, but perhaps he'll share something of his secret with us in the course of his lecture. He's responsible for programs of mission, relief, development and education, and partnerships in more than 100 countries around the world. He's therefore extremely well placed, I think, to speak to this evening's topic, which is Together Towards Life in a World of Division. Will you join me in giving a warm welcome to Roland Fernandes?
Simeon, thank you for your welcome and your words and that illustrious list of people who spoke here before. So anyway, and glad to be in this opportunity and this time to be in conversation with you today. And it's truly an honor, and I come with a sense of deep respect for this lecture, for the church here, and I would say affection as well. Amidst the many demands and challenges that we each carry, I often find myself reflecting on the evolving nature of our work and its relevance in this moment. From that place, I'm continually reminded how deeply our two churches are connected. As United Methodists and British Methodists, we stand with a shared Wesleyan expression, working together in God's mission. My prayers are often focused on where that mission is taking us, from climate justice to migration, from global poverty to humanitarian crisis. Underlying this is our deep commitment to peace and justice, well articulated in the justice-seeking report of the British Methodist Church, which I believe will be discussed tomorrow.
I think you might have to use Sorry.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, can you hear me? Great, okay. So did I start again? Okay, great, I'll continue. So as British Methodists and United Methodists, we stand with a shared Wesleyan expression, working together in God's mission. My prayers are often focused on where that mission is taking us, from climate justice to migration, from global poverty to humanitarian crisis. Underlying this is our deep commitment to peace and justice, well articulated in the justice-seeking report of the British Methodist Church. Seeking justice and peace is at the core of who we are, and these missional realities bind us and call us to demonstrate a faithful and coordinated response. Sitting today in the sessions and this week, there's so much in common, there's so much different, and that's really very interesting to see. For today's conversation, I want to acknowledge and speak to our current context, one that is rapidly shifting and significantly influenced by some of the current political leaders in the United States. While so much could be said about this, I will try and focus my reflections on what is most relevant to the context here today. And I'll try and stay on track with that. John Wesley said, "The world is my parish." And as I see it, Wesley means it is our obligation as church leaders to relate our mission work to our current realities and to speak and act on them accordingly. As I come to you from across the Atlantic, I am deeply aware of what obligation means at this particular moment. It is not lost on me that is something significant, perhaps even ironic, about an American standing before you to speak about partnership, when the trajectory of the United States is headed in the opposite direction. Yet together we share a great deal, notably a Wesleyan tradition that gives this gathering its very identity. We are living in a time in which relationships, including those we share from those across the Atlantic, are experiencing tension and uncertainties in ways we cannot simply ignore. In moments like this, I find myself turning to Scripture. I'm drawn to that moment in the book of Esther, when Mordecai asks Esther whether she has come into her position for such a time as this. As I've said many times over the past 6 years that I've served as General Secretary for Global Ministries, this is our question, not just as individuals, but as churches, as partners, and as a worldwide Methodist family. Together now we have been asked to answer, have we come to our position, our current place, for such a time as this? With confidence, I believe the answer is yes. Yes, we've been called by God for a time such as this, each and every one of us. As I reflect on this centenary Beckly Lecture, I recognize that we stand within the rich Methodist tradition of bringing faith and social holiness together. For 100 years, Beckly Lectures have brought voices into the conversation with the realities of this time. Economists, theologians, public leaders, and those formed by lived experience, each wrestling with what it means to live out the gospel in the world as it is. What is striking is not only the range of concerns addressed in previous Beckly Lectures, be it poverty, dignity, health, justice, creation, but the persistence of those concerns. The same cries for justice, for dignity, for peace, for right relationship continue to echo across the last 100 years. Okay. And in that echo, that was an echo, I guess, we hear a clear direction. Our faith must confront real-world injustice, not just ideas. We must listen and respond to marginalized voices and lived experience. The church has a public responsibility for justice and the common good. I find myself recalling and suggesting a simple but profound articulation adopted last year by the United Methodist Council of Bishops as part of the vision for the United Methodist Church. Love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously. These are not slogans, they are a summons. They are a way of asking, in a very practical and theological terms, what does faithfulness look like now? The first part of that answer to that question is that faithfulness requires humble introspection, especially about the history that has shaped us. We live in a world where relationships are often shaped by self-interest, where alliances feel conditional, where trust is fragile, even non-existent at times. Relationships, however, especially those that grow into partnerships, must be grounded in values, beginning with humility and truthfulness. There's much in the history of Christianity, and particularly its Western expressions, for which we can give thanks. At the same time, there's also much that calls for reflection and frank honesty. The spread of Christianity has at times been intertwined with systems of power that diminished cultures, displaced peoples, and misrepresented the very gospel we proclaim. I know you've done a lot of work on this today, so it might be a little bit of repetition here, but I think I'm addressing it from the different context. Regrettably, some national and global leaders continue to promote these systems of power and dominance, misusing and misrepresenting the gospel. Notably, the words of a few but influential US political leaders stand in direct contradiction to the theology of mission to which we, as people of faith, are called. Their divisive rhetoric and actions are antithetical to Christian values and beliefs. For those who may speak with pride about Western civilization, its Christian heritage, its culture, its history of sacrifice and achievement, it seems the intent in a geopolitical context is to anchor and protect a long-standing and arguably worthy Euro-American view of partnership. For example, this was presumably the intent meant by the United States Secretary of State when he spoke of transatlantic unity in February this year at the Munich Security Conference. Coincidentally, this was around the same time that I received an email from Simeon to speak today, and I began to give thoughts about my remarks. And so I wondered where to start, and that was a good starting point. There are many religious, scientific, artistic, political achievements in the history of the West that we should honor and perpetuate with gratitude. But there's also much in the history of the West that calls for lamentation, repentance, and reparation. The same expansion that carried Christianity to the furthest corners of the earth also carried the slave ships. It carried the plantation system. It carried the doctrine of terra nullius, the legal fiction that indigenous lands were empty and available for seizure. It carried the mission schools that took children from their families and told them that their languages, their traditions, their names, their very identities were inferior and had to be erased. Western civilization cannot be separated from Western colonialism. The world carries with it the legacy of Western imperialism, and we cannot move forward together in partnership without being honest about that. If I may, let me ground this not only in history, but also briefly in my own lived experience. I was born in Kolkata in India. For many decades, and now my wife, who's also from India, and I have made our home in the United States. I've been blessed with an experience that offers perspective for seeing, in a broader context, the political divisions, especially transatlantic ones, in which we now find ourselves seemingly entrapped. Calcutta, now Kolkata, served as the capital of the British Empire in India for almost 140 years and was considered in the 19th century, according to several historians, the second most important city in the empire after London. Growing up in Kolkata, I was able to study and see the impact of colonialism from various lenses. I've served in various roles and countries for my work on behalf of the church. First, the Methodist Church in India, then working in the mission for the Global Ministries in the Philippines, followed by Global Ministries roles in the United States, first in New York City, and then in Atlanta, Georgia, where we moved our headquarters in 2016. This diverse journey has played an important role in shaping my perspective and allows me to hear more clearly the tension or dissonance in the remarks and policy ideas espoused by today's political leaders, or some of them. For me, despite what we may gladly cherish about it, Western civilization is a contested concept, especially when it is winnowed to narrowly framed nostalgia. And it is precisely here that our theology must guide us. Lest history be allowed to run unchecked, defining our future mission more than God does. I want to focus and call our attention here to the World Council of Churches, the Commission of Mission and Evangelism document named Together Towards Life, Mission and Evangelism in Changing Landscapes. This was issued in 2012, but it remains relevant today as we continue to navigate our changing landscapes in mission and evangelism. The WCC's landmark document says it plainly. We regret that mission activity linked with colonization has often denigrated cultures and failed to recognize the wisdom of local communities. That is carefully diplomatic sentence for something that was, at its worst, cultural genocide in ecclesiastical robes. We must ask the uncomfortable question: how much of what we called mission brought death rather than life? How much of mission served human empires and not the kingdom of God? And that is perhaps not just a question of the past, but remains relevant with us today, as historical patterns like patriarchy and dependency persist. We are called to begin mission partnership from a different standpoint, out of a practice of Christian humility, not a sense of cultural superiority. The theology of mission that guides global ministries begins with civilization, not with civilization, but with God. Our foundational statement affirms God's mission reclaims the life of all creatures and redeems all creation for God's intended purpose. Holy Scriptures bear witness to mission that begins with God, belongs to God, and will be fulfilled by God at the end of time. So it's not our mission, not a Western mission, not a civilizational mission, not a conceptualization of how we want the world to look, but God's mission, Missio Dei. That distinction is not trivial, it is everything. When we view our present moments through this theological lens, certain narratives become deeply troubling. When we engage in mission partnership in the spirit of Missio Dei, we follow the gospel, the good news. The gospel of Jesus Christ is a gospel of life. I've come that they may have life and have it in all its fullness. It is the gospel of a God who hears the cry of the oppressed, who confronts every pharaoh and every empire with the demand, "Let my people go." Our Global Ministries theology describes Jesus as one who poured himself out in servanthood for all humanity and emptied himself of divine privilege, assuming the trials and risks of human limitation. Jesus identified in compassion with all humanity and lived in radical faithfulness to the will of God. That is the Christ we seek to follow. Not the Christ of empire, but the Christ of kenosis, the self-emptying, the servant who washed feet. And the church that follows this Christ is called to a corresponding posture. The United Methodist Church, through Global Ministries, is committed to a mission theology that listens before it speaks, that accompanies before it leads, and that asks, what is God already doing here, before it arrives with its own programs? Our theology of mission is clear. There are no places where God's grace has not always been present, only places where God in Christ is not recognized, served, or heeded. Well, let me say that even as I make several references today to the Global Ministries mission statement of mission theology, it does not imply that our actions as an agency have historically always reflected our theology. Actions speak louder than words, and many times our actions have strayed far from these words. WCC's theology Together Towards Life puts it this way. We understand our task is not to bring God along, but to witness to the God who is already there. That is the mission we are called to, not the mission of imperial Christianity, but the mission of a God who was in the margins long before we arrived there. These larger themes form the theological framework through which I will explore a few specific areas of practical application today. A key emphasis of my work as General Secretary has been to focus our support on the strategic priorities of our mission partners. We support the priorities of local leaders in communities of color in the United States, leaders in African and Filipino United Methodist Episcopal areas, and autonomous churches around the world, because we believe that these leaders are best equipped to know how God is moving in their local settings. It is not Global Ministries' job to dictate to these local leaders how they should join in God's mission. It is our job to support and walk with them as they engage in God's mission in ways that they have discerned themselves. For some, and again I refer to language of some of our current US political leaders, it is easy to demonize the other with false beliefs that mass migration threatens civilization, that climate policy threatens prosperity, that diversity threatens cultural cohesion. The other is a danger, they say. These kind of demonizations, grounded in the psychology of threat, is not the psychology of the gospel. It is a psychology of empire, which has always justified its exclusions and its violence in the language of civilizational survival, and continues to do so today. The WCC document reminds us that the marginalized in society are the main partners in God's mission. They are not threats, not problems to be managed. They are partners, co-bearers of God's image, vessels of the Holy Spirit, angels of God's mission. Global Ministries theology affirms that the church is called to cross every boundary, to call for true human dignity among all peoples, especially among those regarded as the least of God's children, while making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. When I look at the attacks in the United States on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, when I reflect on the challenges faced by migrants and asylum seekers, many of whom are leaving very difficult circumstances, often caused by US regional policies, when I see the massive reductions in aid programs and their unfolding consequences, when I sense that some communities, people of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, individuals with disabilities, feeling less included in public life, I experience a deep sense of sadness. And needless to say, these concerns lead me to feel a personal and faith-informed responsibility to speak. Speaking itself, of course, is not enough, but that's what I'm doing today. The intentional dismantling, and I would say destruction, of policies related to diversity, equity, and inclusion by the current US administration have been stunning and shocking. Programs have been eliminated, jobs cut, promotions denied solely on the basis of race and gender. These actions are antithetical to the teachings of the gospel. The United Methodist Church and we at Global Ministries have not been silent on these matters. But are we doing enough is always the question. We affirm as a matter of biblical conviction that diversity is a gift of God, not a threat to be managed, and that God's care extends to all people. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are at the heart of Scripture. Beginning with Genesis 1, God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Every person bears the image of God and has inherent worth and dignity. No person or group is superior or inferior to another. When Christ invites us to the table, all are included on the guest list, and all receive their portion. Think too of Pentecost. The Spirit did not erase languages, the Spirit honored them. Every person heard the gospel in their own tongue. Together towards life draws precisely this lesson. The enforcement of uniformity discredits the uniqueness of each individual created in the image and likeness of God. Whereas Babel attempted to enforce uniformity, the preaching of the disciples on the day of Pentecost resulted in a unity in which personal particularities and community identities were not lost but respected. That is the vision we must hold and act from. Not uniformity, not the erasure of difference in the name of a single civilization, but the Pentecostal communion of difference, where every voice is heard, every identity is honored, and the body of Christ is recognized as the most diverse community on earth. Our Wesleyan heritage speaks directly to this. Our theology of mission statement affirms that the Wesleyan expectation of perfection in love draws redeemed individuals into appropriate, active, transforming relationships of wholeness and unity with God, all people, and creation. Perfection in love is not uniformity. It is the fullness of relationship across difference, across boundary, across all that divides. And therefore, our call to mission partnership is a call to care for and include others, not a call to fear or exclusion. When we allocate scholarships to expand educational access for those without it, when we reinforce the dignity and rights of migrants, when we offer disaster preparedness trainings to marginalized communities to support their resiliency, we act out of our belief that all people have inherent worth and all people have a place in God's mission of redemption. And when every person is honored in this way, the fruit is division. It's not division, but peace. What is called peace today is too often pursued to coercion, intimidation, force, the misuse of power, the proliferation of weapons. Ceasefires are imposed by overwhelming military power. Stability is claimed after cities are destroyed. Order is declared once dissent has been silenced. In such a world, peace is often confused with control, and reconciliation is replaced by victory. Peace cannot be born from violence without inheriting its wounds. One of the definitions of peace that has always appealed to me is that peace is the absence of fear. As Nelson Mandela prophetically said, and I'm sure you've noted, peace building is the creation of an environment where all can flourish. When individual or collective fear grips so much of the world today, lasting peace cannot be achieved by simply stopping violence or imposing order through force. Lasting peace can only be achieved by transforming relationships, structures, and cultures to foster justice, equity, and harmony. The work for peace and justice is a part of God's call to mission partnership. Again, Global Ministries' theology of mission asserts that active faith participates in the perfecting and fulfilling grace of God, which claims and implements the promises of God to reconcile divisions in the households of faith and among the peoples and nations of the earth, as all of creation groans for redemption. The biblical phrase groaning for redemption colorfully demonstrates what is at stake in our work for peace and justice. How many people around the world are groaning or crying right now because of war and conflict? Reconciliation among households of faith seems almost impossible. WCC, Together Towards Life, reassures us that the good news of God's reign is about the promise of the actualization of a just and inclusive world. God's reign is a reign of peace achieved not through domination, but through justice and inclusion. And we know how hard peace building is because it is about resolving conflicts, some of which have existed for decades, even centuries. In response to the devastating impacts of the budget cuts implemented by the current US administration last year, Global Ministries and Higher Education and Ministry launched a campaign named This Moment Matters, which focused on 5 areas of response: health, education, food security, migration, and peace. These areas are already a part of our existing work, but we have increased the focus on them. Over $32 million in grants have been made in these 5 areas over the past year. And This Moment Matters is also a current fundraising campaign as we try to increase its impact. I'm aware that this is a drop in the ocean based on how much funding was cut by the US administration, $32 billion from USAID alone. But it is still an important Christian witness in these challenging times. Our increasing focus on peace and justice work as an agency is being implemented through working along and with partners. And it is no doubt a daunting task in these times. Let me mention a couple of efforts in this work. Among them, I'm very grateful for our partnership with you in Jerusalem through a Methodist liaison office for the last 14 years, along with the World Methodist Council and the British Methodist Church. We have stood alongside communities in Israel and Palestine and amplified Christian voices within the worldwide Methodist community in the pursuit of peace and justice. A lot has been said in the past 2 days about this work, and so I won't say more about it here, but deeply grateful to the work that Dave and others are doing. In the West Bank, thousands of Palestinians are displaced each year, the result of Israeli military operations and attacks by Israeli settlers. There's been a marked increase in violent attacks by Israeli settlers, frequently carried out with the support of or without the intervention from the Israeli Defense Forces. These actions, along with recent legislative changes, contribute to the ongoing de facto annexation of the West Bank. Despite these limitations, we must make every effort to stand alongside those living under occupation, those working nonviolently for its end, and all who seek a future shaped by justice, dignity, and peace. This is a ministry of presence, accompaniment, and perseverance. The impact of this ministry cannot always be measured easily, but the work remains essential. The United Methodist Church also remains deeply connected to advocacy for peace on the Korean Peninsula, marked by a continuing prayers for reconciliation between the North and the South, and eventually genuine reunification of the peninsula. That work includes attention to peace and human rights across the broader region, which has long stood as a formal commitment to the United Methodist Church. Crucial to this work has been our membership and participation in the Ecumenical Forum for Peace, Reunification, and Development on the Korean Peninsula, also known as EFK, with which the British Methodist Church has also been engaged. As some of you know, the EFK was formed 20 years ago, building on the partnership between the World Council of Churches, the Christian Conference of Asia, and the United Methodist Church. It was inspired by the spirit of the Tanzanzo process in 1984 and the Gillian consultation in 1986. The consultation marks its 40th anniversary this year, but the sad reality is that true lasting peace on the peninsula is still far away. Now, if you can think further about my reference earlier to groaning for redemption, let us bear in mind our concerns are not only human, they are also ecological. In that context, some of our leaders in the public sphere, despite the evidence, such as the increasing record-breaking heat waves in Europe every year, among many other things, continue to dismiss the concern for the ecological crisis as the work of a climate cult. Climate consciousness is described as a kind of an irrational fear, something to be moved beyond on the road to civilizational renewal. I want to say clearly and without apology that caring for creation is not a cult, it's a covenant. From the very opening of Scripture, we are placed in the garden as stewards, not owners, not exploiters, but keepers of a living world that belongs to God. The Hebrew word avad, to serve the earth, is the same root as the word for worship. To tend creation is to worship its creator. Global Ministries' theology of mission affirms that active faith participates in the perfecting and fulfilling grace of God, which claims and implements the promises of God to deliver exploited persons and oppressed peoples, to restore the sanctity and integrity of God's creation. WCC's Together Towards Life calls us to move beyond a narrowly human-centered approach and to embrace forms of mission which express our reconciled relationship with all created life. That is not the language of a cult, that is the language of a gospel. The ecological crisis is a mission crisis. It falls most heavily on the poorest communities on earth. We heard this morning about Samoa, other Pacific Island nations, sub-Saharan farmers, Arctic indigenous peoples, among many others. When the seas rise, it is not the powerful who drown first. When harvests fail, it is not the wealthy who go hungry first. We do not care for creation because we've joined a cult. We care for creation because we serve the God of life. Like the British Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church has formally committed to care of the environment. At the World Council of Churches Assembly in Karlsruhe in Germany in 2022, it was uplifting to see that care of the environment emerged as the one issue on which all were agreed. In 2026, the WCC launched the Ecumenical Decade for Climate Justice Action. As some of you know, ecumenical agreement does not happen easily. Among the concrete actions Global Ministries has taken is our Yambasu Agriculture Initiative in Africa, named for the late Bishop John Yambasu of Sierra Leone. With an emphasis on building long-term sustainability in shared partnership with local United Methodist leadership, the Yambasu Initiative has, since its inception in 2020, enabled sustainable farming, food security, and economic empowerment in multiple vulnerable communities throughout Africa. Another new initiative is integrating sustainable technology in disaster resilience, response, and recovery. We know the disasters are increasing because of and exacerbated by climate change. Traditional technologies for providing basics like electricity and water continue to fossil fuel emissions that sow the seeds of future disasters. But we can reduce our footprint by providing equipment like solar and battery storage to local disaster response leaders. Through Global Ministries' Earthkeepers program, now in its 10th year, hundreds of faithful United Methodists have participated in trainings that have helped them understand and respond to God's care for all of creation. The projects that they have then implemented in their own communities are a public witness to the God of life. In the United States, this moment presents a significant period of reflection for many churches about what type of witness they're offering to wider society. There are ongoing conversations, some promoted by political leaders, about the relationship between Christianity and national identity, as well as the role faith communities play in public and political life. These dynamics are being experienced with varying intensity across different contexts. Some of these conversations we could say are healthy, some most certainly are not. Christian nationalism and white Christian nationalism in particular is a significant issue. Within this landscape, perspectives differ. Some churches are more comfortable engaging in the conversation, responding to political demands, while others are more cautious. The United Methodist Church, following its own recent division, has created its commitment to a Wesleyan tradition that emphasizes inclusiveness, global connection, and social holiness. It continues to affirm and uphold this understanding in its mission and identity. Coming back to the bigger picture, the challenges I've shared today are not confined to one nation. the United States does not hold a monopoly on the historical failures I have been describing. European colonial mission wrote some of the most painful chapters in its history as well, and you have well acknowledged that. This is a shared history we must acknowledge so that we can together commit to a different future. We need each other, not as an exercise in transatlantic nostalgia, but because the mission of the God of life is larger than any one organization or agency, any one church, any one nation, any one tradition, or even any one civilization. Together we can do much more than we can do alone. Global Ministries' theology of mission is clear, that mission is never the possession of one nation or tradition. It speaks of the church as those who, in all times and places, unite the living body of Christ to join in God's mission of redemption, bearing witness to God's presence in the world. In all times and all places, not in Western times or Anglo-American places. The WCC's Together Towards Life puts it this way: mission is the overflow of the infinite love of the triune God. It overflows national borders. It overflows civilizational categories. It overflows our comfortable definitions of who belongs and who does not. My earliest positive images of the church in India came from witnessing its deep commitment to justice so that all could experience the fullness of life that Jesus spoke about. The work of the church with the poor and the marginalized was very inspiring to me. What does it mean to love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously in the context of today's world, with the increase in nationalism, including Christian nationalism? I believe some of the reflections I've shared today speak directly to the new vision statement, and my hope is that the United Methodist Church will actually live into this vision, demonstrating through its actions what love, service, and leadership means in a time of growing division and exclusion. Friends and colleagues in the Wesleyan tradition, we live in a frightening and disorienting time. The old certainties, though far from perfect, political, ecclesiastical, and civilizational, are breaking apart. But in the light that emerges from these cracks, we will find new insights. Instead of calling for the renewal of the greatest civilization in human history, as some of our political leaders would now have it, we are calling to something different and much deeper. We are called to a renewal of our covenant with the God of life for a time such as this, with the God who made the earth and called it good, the God who was born into a refugee family in occupied territory, the God who chose the margins as the place of revelation, the God who on the day of Pentecost spoke in every language at once. Our theology holds before us the ultimate horizon. The church, as faithful community, moves full of hope towards the transformation of the world and the day when God's mission is fulfilled. Not the West's mission, not the empire's mission, God's mission, tending towards the fullness of all creation. Equally important is that the church moves forward together in hope, because it is first and foremost God's church. WCC's Together Towards Life affirms that the overall goal of this mission is understood, that they may have life and have it in all its fullness. It goes on to clarify this goal by speaking of the economy of life, a phrase that challenges us to evaluate every policy, every program, every alliance, not by what it does for those already prosperous, but by what it does for those most vulnerable. That is what the economy the God of life is building, and we are called to be its agents. Bringing some of these reflections together, what is our call for a time such as this? We are called to mission that builds genuine partnerships across the Atlantic and across the globe, not in the image of Western supremacy, but in the image of the servant Christ who washed feet. We are called to repent of colonial mission honestly and courageously, and ask how we can participate in healing rather than in reenacting the harm, because the theology of life must grapple with the deaths that were caused in the name of mission. We are called to celebrate diversity as a Pentecostal gift, refusing the logic of civilizational uniformity and insisting that the body of Christ is most fully itself when it's most fully diverse. We are called to accompany the marginalized as the primary partners of God's mission, not as objects of charity, but as bearers of truth that the comfortable church cannot see from its position of privilege. We are called to pursue peace through justice, believing that true peace is possible not through domination and intimidation, but only when people live in right relationship with one another and all are free of fear. And we are called to care for creation as an act of worship, because every tree, every river, and every species is the handiwork of a loving God. And we will not call that concern a cult. It is covenant faithfulness. And we are called to witness to the God of life in public ways, without the need for Christianity to dominate debate in the public sphere. As we seek to discern and answer this call, our Global Ministries theology of mission reminds us to remain always alert, for the Spirit is always moving to sweep the church into a new mission age. With openness and gratitude, we await the leading of the Spirit in ways yet not seen, as God continues to work God's purposes out in our own day in a new way. That Spirit does not blow from west to east. That Spirit blows where it will, from the global south to the global north, from the margins to the center, from those whom power has forgotten to those who have grown comfortable in power's shelter. The Spirit who hovered over the waters of chaos at creation is still at work. The Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead is still overturning the power of death. The Spirit who fell at Pentecost on people of every nation and language is still speaking. And she's speaking in voices that power has tried to silence. That is what gives us hope. As people of faith, hope is what makes a difference in responding to our call. But hope is also a choice we make. In 1 Peter 3:15, the words, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." Our task is to listen. Our task is to speak. And our task is to walk together towards life, even when the path feels uncertain. If we are indeed here for a time such as this, then perhaps our calling is not to remove uncertainty, but to respond faithfully within it, and to join together as one, loving boldly, serving joyfully, and leading courageously. Thanks be to God.
Thank you so much, Roland. Such a wide-ranging series of topics that you have opened up, and I'm sure there are people who will want to ask questions and share comments and interrogate them further. We've got about 20 minutes for having a time of questions and conversation. So if you'd like to ask questions, please raise your hands. If you're online, then do put it into the chat, and we will also filter that into in the room. Hannah's got the microphone. So have we got any questions to start us off? Jen. Can you wait for the microphone?
Thank you. Thank you so much for. Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much, Roland. My name's Jen Smith.
Go again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for the technical issues, friends. Yes.
My name's Jen Smith, and I'm a Methodist minister representing the London district here in Britain. You talked about hope as a choice. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because I think a number of us right now are working very hard on what the practices are that lead to hope, to avoid the twin perils of denial or of despair.
Yeah, it's, when I first wrote this, I didn't have the word hope in it. And then I was struggling with something, and I said, what's making me do this? And I realized it was hope. And so I think it first starts for me, it's I would say it's firstly at a personal level. In our own lives, we live in hope, but I think it's a reassurance of faith. Like the question, what does faithfulness mean in this time? I think an essential element of faithfulness is hope. I think they kind of go together. And so for me, it's a deepening of faith. It's that personal connection starting there, but also seeing the evidence of that faith that it gives us hope. The saying that the moral arc is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, these days, it's even hard to see that, and some even question that. But I do feel that if we don't have that hope and we don't work towards it, then we truly despair. So I have to question that myself all the time in the work we do. With all the impacts we've had over the last year and a half, with the reductions in all the programs that we did, what gives us hope? And that's what I would say.
So we are being challenged by the technology to learn to share well. So if you would like to ask a question, I invite you to come forward if you're able to, so that we can all hear the questions. Who's got another question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's not a question, but just following on from what was said, that hope, I feel, comes from listening to the voices of those who are in these difficult situations. For instance, in the Kairos 2 document, although it's very real about all the horrific things that are happening, there is hope there. Those people who have written that from their lived experience are not giving up. They are giving us hope by showing their resilience in the face of this awful situation.
Thank you for sharing with us. My question is around how is it possible for us in Britain or the US or in UMC or in MCB to be led by those on the margins when we hold, in the words of a not so great philosopher, we hold all the cards of power? How do we make that happen?
I don't know that there's a prescribed way for making it happen. It's just, I would say, you have to share the cards. In a true sense, I think as we engage, and we've been trying to be very intentional about it, as we engage in these conversations, it's not easy. This has developed over centuries of this work. And so it's a very hard work. And even as we all struggle with this, the reality is the imbalance of resources caused by many reasons, as we all know. And so that has created a kind of dependency and also two levels, and to make it a level playing field is very hard on both sides of that. But I do think it needs a lot of effort, and we've really been intentional about listening and trying to take as the leadership of those we work with and listen to that, and it is not easy. It's a challenge all the time, but it first needs intention. The biggest thing is, do we really have an intention to do it, or is it just sounds good to say it? And that's the big difference, I think. Yeah.
I'm encouraged by your presentation, and thank you. I am always struggling with the question, when does resilience become life-denying? this is really hard work trying to navigate some of these things in order for power to be shared, in order for us to all have meaningful places at the table. But when does that resilience become life-denying?
I don't know. I don't really have a definitive answer, to be honest with you. I think it will all depend on each situation that you're in. I guess resilience, I don't have a definite answer, because we do need the resilience, but at some point, I don't definitely know. It's a question that needs deeper thought. Maybe you need to clarify more specifically what you're trying to ask, because I'm not clear the connection between the two. Maybe helpful if you explain that.
Might it be helpful to take it the other way around? When does resilience become liberative and life-giving?
I don't have a definitive answer to that. but I do think that resilience. I mean, resilience is a form is life-giving in a sense. It all depends how we define life-giving. But so I do think that to have resilience. I mean, the example that you gave around Palestine was it's like, how do you have resilience in a condition like that where you can continue suppression? And so I guess it depends on how do you mean life-giving, and when does resilience result in true equity is another question, which I think is a different question, where I hope that happens. But in itself, I don't know what the option other than resilience is, and persistence with it, and that hopefully that someday things will really be how we hope them to be. But again, each context and each situation is different. And that's the other thing we have to also acknowledge. So I don't know if there's a clear definition for this, because some situations do result ultimately with a lot of effort in giving life, and others take a much longer time. So.
Roland, thank you so much for that. There were so many phrases you used that will go around and around in my head. One of the phrases you used was around the economics of life. And that struck me as so different from the economics of money. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that phrase.
Was that phrase? No, I need to get it right. I mean, I know what you're talking about. Anyway, I can't find it. I think that what I was trying to really say there is that I think the reality is to the earlier point. I think it's the money that really has driven us, and how do we look at it differently? And that's really the whole question of that. I think the way we see that the way the economy of life as God defines it is different as how we define it, and we use economy with money, and that's what I was trying to refer to.
Hi, Roland. I think that as I look at the situation in the United States, the political situation there, and the situation that we have here in Britain, how do we as churches keep our hope alive when it looks like, and I could say that also for our Palestinian siblings, how do we keep our hope alive when it just seems an uphill task when we look at the political landscape? Perhaps you could help us to see where the hope is there.
I think Bishop Hope can answer. That's a joke. No, I mean, that's exactly the point I was trying to make. We have to continue to have hope and work for this. I think the struggles, if you look historically at all the struggles, they came with great work, which took a long time, as you know, in different contexts. And so, and again, I think our faith plays a big role in it. And I would just say that even in the United Methodist Church, and Bishop Hope or David can correct me, we're not all on the same page. You know, we may have one statement, but there are many thoughts behind that statement, which, you know, and so it's not easy in a significantly large denomination. But I also would say that the work of the churches, and one of the sad realities of the United States today is that religion has been used as I said, misusing the gospel and misrepresenting the gospel. But at the same time, the work of the mainline denominations has been really a lot. It's not talked about, but behind the scenes, a lot is happening, which is continuing to create some pressure for pushback. So I would not, having been involved in some of that, I would say I wouldn't underestimate the work of the churches in this. I think it does have a voice, and we continue to make that voice heard as best we can. And so both on a personal and on a communal level, I think the voice of faith, the voice of the church is really important, and I think it can counter the narrative, at least in different degrees. But I would say it's had some impact, and that's why I think we are probably not sliding back as much as we could if there was no pushback against it.
We have a question for one of our online participants. Brian has said, I was involved in supporting communities through the recent race riots in Belfast. How do you help the local voices who feel alienated that it's not their home anymore? I don't know that I can really give an answer other than what I've said so far. It's very complex. Dealing with personal issues, whether it's through the fires or disasters, there's just no easy answer to it. And I don't know that I'm the best equipped person to answer that question. Again, I think for me, faith and hope is a big part of it. But how do we work in communities, again, depends on the context and how we respond to that. So I don't know if anybody else here has more wisdom on this subject than I do, but I don't know I can offer more than that. So yeah. Thank you for your question, though.
Paul, have a question.
You referred quite a lot to the World Council of Churches, or a document of the World Council of Churches. And I was wondering how far you think it's possible now for the Christian community as a whole, at a global level, to make statements, to have an influence at a global level? Or are we, in fact, so divided that it's not a feasible option?
What I also said was ecumenical agreement doesn't come easily. So that document was just a very relevant place to go to, because it was created with a lot of, the World Council of Churches has 375 denominations in it. I don't know that it's easy to get statements on some things. Like I said, and climate change is definitely one example, but so many other issues are so divisive, whether we talk of the Israel-Palestine issue or the other issues, it's just not easy. And so I don't know that the church will speak as one voice. I don't know that's a reality, but I don't want to sound pessimistic about it, but it is not easy to get the church to speak on one voice on anything. The World Council of Churches is trying to do what it can, but again, it doesn't include every Christian voice for sure, and that's the challenge that we have. So.
mentioned about the difficulty of ecumenical conversations going on. I just wondered whether UMC have had any interfaith dialogue on some of these issues, whether there's any anything that you can speak together with in terms of interfaith, Muslim, Christian, Jewish conversations.
Bishop Watt, I hate to do it, but she's the ecumenical officer. Do you want to answer that question, or do you have anything you can say? Sorry to put you on the spot, but you can answer it, but I comment. Sure, comment on it. Yes. Sorry.
I'm one of the ecumenical officers for the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church. And one of the things I quickly discovered in talking with the bishops about their engagement with ecumenical and interfaith work is I cold called a number of them when I stepped into the role to ask what's going on in your areas. And not a one of them mentioned the World Council of Churches or the National Council of Churches or the World, these huge overarching organizations. They all mention a grassroots rise up of people, particularly younger people, in their communities to join hands, as we saw in the U.S. in Minneapolis last year, and you're well aware of what happened there. And so I think that's a changing model for working together. For people like myself who've been around a long time, we're used to these organizations that were founded and have done good work. But for younger people, networking, coming together, rising up is a sign of strong hope in the world, I think.
Can I use my privilege as the chair to ask the last question of you, Roland? To speak out is costly, and to take a stand can be costly. You talked about the stance that the church had taken in relation to some of the US government dismantling of DEI commitments. Has that had ramifications within the church and for the church's reputation beyond the church? And if so, how have they been dealt with?
I think like I said earlier, I think the United Methodist Church has not necessarily been on the forefront of speaking out on these issues, to be honest. But of course, as agencies, some of us have spoken out on different issues. But the churches as a whole, I think, has made an impact. Many churches have made statements. Some of us have made individual statements. There's been, the question is, what leverage does the government have to impact you? And so if you have, depending on federal government grants and you make statements, then you're in really, to be honest, that you're in trouble in those situations. And that's why many of our educational institutions have had to make changes to the whole policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which they really believe in, but they had no choices. Not all of them, but many of them had no choices because they were dependent on government grants. That's why I said the destruction and the viciousness at which the government has attacked this diversity and inclusion has been quite stunning. But so I think it all depends on where you are, how you're funded, what the role with the government connections are. But of course, there's also a lot of curbing of free speech. At least attempts are made. So we don't know, but I'll leave that alone for now. But it's definitely not what it used to be, and it's really saddening to see that. But at the same time, if the church doesn't speak, who's going to speak? So yeah. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jude Levermore, Head of Mission in the Connectional Team. My privilege to be a friend of Roland's for quite a few years now. Roland, I just want to say thank you for this lecture. I want to pay huge tribute to you because of all the people I know, you never make it about you. You never make it about you. And that's such a model of leadership that we don't see very often. And we really don't see it very often. And so it's a privilege. It's a real privilege to know you, and I deeply appreciate you. You're so quietly spoken, and that the truths that you say are deeply felt and deeply meaningful. And I think we have really wanted to and needed to hear them this evening, and I'm very grateful to you. This moment does matter, and I'm grateful that we can work together with the UMC and particularly with GBGM and GBHEM in making a difference at this particular time. It's a privilege to be able to stand and serve alongside you. One thing that I have found about Roland is that he is a fabulous friend, and also he's a great football supporter. Yes. And so one of the things that keeps my hope alive are the WhatsApp messages that we share between each other, usually about Arsenal. And so, and our friends, football can bring us together. It's the beautiful game, remember? And we've been talking a lot recently about the flag issue. The flag issue in our country, which is a big one, and the flag issue in the States as they come towards the 4th of July. Do you put your flag up everywhere? Do we put our flags up everywhere when we support England? Anyway, I've bought a flag for Roland, especially for you, to take home with you. It is, if I can get it out. Oh, wrong way up. There we go. Arsenal 26, champion. Roland, tonight you are our champion. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Friends, thank you. That is it. Go well.
Hi, I'm Christine.
And I'm Alex.
One of the most well-known stories told by Jesus is the parable of the Good Samaritan. You know how it goes. A person is attacked and left for dead at the side of the road, and a couple of religious people hurry on past, one after the other. But a Samaritan, a stranger from a different place altogether, shows compassion, bandaging wounds, finding a place of safety, and ensuring that help is provided. And Jesus asks the listeners, who is the neighbor in the story? And the listeners rightly reply, the one who treated the person with compassion. So Jesus says, go and do the same to his listeners, to us.
One of the questions we don't often ask is, what happened the next day? What if another person got attacked and injured on the road? What if there was another compassionate stranger helping them? What if there was a whole network of compassionate strangers helping people all up and down the road? Surely eventually they start to wonder why. Why do people keep getting hurt? Why is there so much injustice? Why do things keep going wrong?
And Martin Luther King Jr. addressed this in his famous sermon, saying, on one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that people will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. His point wasn't to devalue the hard work of the Good Samaritan whose social action saved a life. Instead, he was pointing to a network of Good Samaritans who add social justice to social action, transforming the road and changing the highway.
What might it be like if churches joined together to transform the road, to transform lives? We believe that every church has experience, knowledge, and power. We also know that local stories speak powerfully to national policies. What if we could build a national network of local relationships that enabled churches to grow and share experience, knowledge, power, and relevance across the whole of Britain?
Our denominations are made up of churches that have amazing ministries of witness and evangelism. Churches that welcome asylum seekers, churches that host food banks and community hubs, churches that eat together, churches that inspire and empower children and young people, churches who go to protests, churches who sign petitions, churches who have eco-church awards, churches who visit members who need support or company, churches who pray for peace and justice, churches who are huge and faithful, churches who are tiny and faithful. Each church has a message to share. How much stronger would that message be if each church spoke in our own unique voices, in our own local areas and constituencies, to the people who have political power to change the road, to enact justice?
If that one Good Samaritan had spoken to someone about the need for change, it might have made a tiny difference. But imagine the transformation that 3 or 33 or 303 Good Samaritans reshaping conversations might have inspired. And imagine if those many Good Samaritans were members of communities that shared their concerns and were made up of even more voices. Imagine the transformative power that 650 churches, one in every parliamentary constituency or every community, could inspire.
We have the power to make change happen when we collaborate and form relationships.
The Constituency Action Network, CAN, is about forming relationships that have the power to reshape the road, to take part in God's journey towards a new world of justice and peace. If you already have thriving relationships with your local politicians, CAN's an opportunity to inspire other churches and to strengthen the network's collaborative work by helping us to learn more about the relationship and the public issues that matter to your church. If you would like to grow a new or improved relationship with politicians, or to simply think differently about politics and to work for peace and justice, CAN is an opportunity to be resourced by the network as you make that next move.